We begin this episode with some excruciating B-roll footage to cross-pollinate between the different strands of my channel. We're in a hybrid rental car, and it displays the real-time electric charge and discharge. I'm currently making power demand estimates for my Arctic vehicle, Project Bernard, and so it was mildly interesting to see how much power the electric motor needs to move the 1.3-ton car at various speeds, gradients, and on bumpy ground. Anyway, before we talk about dehydrated food, I stopped for a riverside lunch en route to our venue. Alan's cousin was moored at the visitor berth, and it was interesting to see what tweaks and mods this lifeboat's human had embarked upon. Speaking of venues, this was mine. I don't like doing episodes in my own kitchen, as the lighting is shocking and there's a wall where the camera would need to be. Instead, I picked a rather quaint, historic overnighter. And to yet further delay the inevitable culinary excitement, I'm pretending to enter one of my loft's many rooms without having set up the camera, walked out again and then re-entered. For those still watching, you have my sympathy. Welcome once again to Not My Kitchen. This is the kitchen in a guest house halfway between two speaking jobs that I was doing. And don't ever believe that I don't read the comments. In the previous expedition meal episodes in this mini-series, I've been asked to cover a couple of very, very basic meals, which I suppose have always got to end up on the menu of an expeditioner, whether you do stuff in the hot regions or the cold regions or so on. I'm always going to be focusing more on the cold regions. But yes, people have mentioned A, couscous, and B, chili con carne, or just chili, whatever you want to call it. There are some controversies, of course, involved in those two things, and I'll try and cover them off. But I hope that we will unravel some of the great long-term mysteries of self-made expedition food. Onwards. As I did with the macaroni cheese, I also bought something to compare it to, and this is just tinned beef and beans chili con carne. We're not going to be expecting much from this, of course, because it's tinned food, but at least it will be something of a benchmark. Try to not get this everywhere. Oh yeah, that doesn't look good. Anyway, this is what I've signed up for. Oh, that's pretty awful. The taste is terrible. It's quite low in rice. There's only a bit of rice. I guess it's probably reasonably high in meat content, but it's not. I don't think you'd want to find out what animal that came from. Beans are the right consistency, but this is tinned food. We can now make our version, but not before checking the camera was actually recording. Okay, so we've got the fast cook minute rice in there. Again, still really hard to find in the UK, but those of you across the pond will find it really easy to get minute rice. And then we've got to go for the spices, the flavourings. And basically there are loads of dry versions. They're all just pence each. One made by Coleman's, one made by Supermarket Morrison's, one made by Old El Paso. I guess you could choose which one suits you best, or you could mix them all together like I do. Anyway, that's going to be our quick dry seasoning that will actually turn this into something which I hope tastes half decent. And then to try and make things look a little bit better, as I mentioned in previous videos, what you can do is add some small dried, either dehydrated or freeze-dried vegetables to try and just add to the colour and the general morale of eating this food. Or you could add some other types of mixed seasonings and herbs. But I think for this one, actually, because the taste is going to be dominated by the spices, you maybe don't need quite so much of that. I've got some pine nuts over there, but they are for later on, not necessarily for this. So really all we now need to do is mix the two together. Now, of course, that's going to give you a vegetarian chili mix, which is going to be mostly rice-based. This is then a big decision point for you. You can stay with the veggie option, and you can try and boost the protein levels by adding in a little bit of protein powder. Don't go too heavy on that because it can dominate the taste and it can change the consistency. Or we can go for a meaty version, which involves slightly increasing the cost of the meal. In fact, it's probably going to double the cost of the meal, and use freeze-dried minced or ground beef. And that's what we will try and do here. I will tackle the final bit in a second, which I guess you're all probably waiting for. And this is the reason why I'm always a little bit cautious about chili con carne with expedition food. The minute rice takes a few minutes to soften up with poured boiling water, and then the spice mix. Don't overdo this, otherwise flavour will give way to a parching, dry, sharp taste that will ruin your entire life. And now mix with rehydrated, previously dried minced beef. I'll do a summary overlay for the rice, so the carb heavy, and a meat, so protein heavy version. There are also beans in there, but don't get ahead of yourself. Right, this is always going to be the big question mark. How spicy do you decide to make your chili con carne? Now, if you're anything like me and you're out in cold, windy places, no matter what you do, you're going to probably get chapped lips after a while. Mountaineers get them, polar travelers get them. It's just one of those things. And of course, chapped lips and chili don't really go together. It will sting, and it can actually sting for hours and hours and hours. So I tend to go very light on the chili, and also you don't really want to upset your stomach. Just say you give yourself a funny turn by having a bit too much chili. You don't want to have to rush out the tent in the middle of the night. But yeah, I tend to go either low on the spice or completely absent with chilies altogether and just rely on the other spices in the mix to try and give the right flavour. It's completely up to you, but don't blame me if you're struggling a few days into an expedition and trying to sort of pat your lips down with moisturiser for a couple of hours afterwards. That's my main concern about chili, and I found in the past that the ones that come from the ready-made manufacturers, they haven't really taken that on board, and most of them I think are too spicy. Another thing you need to consider is the rehydration time. The rice, of course, if it's millet rice, will rehydrate pretty quickly and stop going crunchy and become soft. All the other ingredients, freeze-dried vegetables, and obviously the seasoning mix will be fine. The ground beef, as long as it's not too chunky, will be fine as well. Now, what you obviously do find in a lot of chili con carnes are beans, normally kidney beans. What are these? These are cannellini beans, all sorts of quite large beans. They are quite chunky and they take time to rehydrate. And I found in the past, I found some of the ready-made chili con carne meals annoying because everything else in the meal is ready, but the beans are not. And so it's fine if you can leave them in one of my food mugs, my vacuum sealed mugs, for say 10, even 15 minutes. You'll get nice rehydrated beans, but most people want to eat faster than that. And so either you'll have to go for smaller beans, cut the beans in half, or forego them altogether. It depends whether you can handle having a chili con carne without kidney beans. Personal preference, but be aware. Okay, so Okay, so I've left that all to rehydrate for a few minutes, I think 6 or 7 minutes. Let's give it a go. Looks pretty good. Smells pretty good. I've gone reasonably light on the meat because there's no reason why you need all of your calories from protein. There are also ways of beefing up the calorie count here by adding in some butter, even some cheese I guess you could put in here as well. All of it freeze-dried, and that will just up the calorie count without adding too many grams. That's really tasty. That's genuinely good. I left the beans for easily long enough to rehydrate. A little bit of a crunch on that one. 10 minutes for the full-size beans would be best. And for that, you really do need a vacuum flask for letting your rehydrating happen, because otherwise at minus 40 degrees in a tent, your food's going to be cold. That's a win. So I will put the details and the ratios in probably a little caption in a second, but I'm just going to carry on eating right now. It's bad manners to eat out of a pan, isn't it? My kitchen, my rules. Okay, the second one this time is going to be couscous. A lot of you thought this is a very, very good, easy, quick cook expedition food. It's a good carbohydrate base for whatever meal you want to put it with, whether it's veggie or non-veggie, whether it's full of nuts, whether it's full of cheese and butter, or whether it's just oil. I mean, whatever you want to do with it, it's fairly versatile. But I have a bit of an issue with couscous when it's eaten in a sort of an expedition setting, in the way that you have to make it either in a packet or in an expedition flask and then just sort of left for 5-10 minutes to rehydrate. And I'll tell you what I mean. This is a normal couscous, so lots of tiny, tiny little globs, little grains, whatever you want to call couscous. Anyway, some of that can go in there, into the mug. We all know how quickly couscous cooks. It's almost instant. In that goes, probably a little bit too much, but I think that normally too much is better than too little. Where's my fork gone? It's over there. Right, so that's going to be just rehydrated couscous. What you'll then obviously have to do for a high calorie expedition meal is add either oils or dried butter. And then that, I find, with the very, very small grains of couscous, gives you, to me, a blob. It all sticks together and it becomes not the light, fluffy couscous you might enjoy on a Mediterranean holiday. You just get this lump of almost like congealed, solid carbohydrate. I don't find it particularly appetizing. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Do you see what I mean? I haven't even put that much fat. I've added a bit of oil and a bit of dry butter into there, and it's already this sort of one entity not really for me. And no matter how many fun nuts you put in there to try and excitify the whole thing, yeah, not really a goer. I think that couscous should be eaten at home, at leisure, with friends, not in a cold tent when you're trying to desperately get as many calories into yourself as you possibly can. So let's put the normal couscous aside and bring to the fore giant couscous. This has a number of different names. Wherever you live in the world, they may have a different label for this, but we have giant couscous here. These are, I'm not even sure if they're from the same exact process. I'm not sure how they're made in comparison to a normal couscous. It might just be a different sort of processing. And it's not like bulgur wheat, which cooks in a much slower fashion. This still, and it varies. Some of these cook faster than others. You've got to find one that cooks quickly, because you don't want to have to simmer it for 15 minutes, because the whole point of this is that you pour in boiling water. You can't actively cook it for time. It needs to be the residual heat from that boiling water, and then in hopefully 5 to 10 minutes you have yourself a meal. We're not making gourmet food in a tent here. That's not the intention. Right, so let's get some of this giant couscous on the go. For both of these meal ideas, I'm substituting in a kettle in place of a liquid fuel camping stove. 2 reasons. The owner of the guest house is not enormously keen on burning petrol in the loft of an historic wooden roof building, and there's no 230 volt socket in my tent. Anyway, let's get some of that dimensionally challenged couscous in there. Probably enough. Close that up, because that wasn't super cheap. I'll let you know how much it cost in the details. It's more expensive than normal couscous, but all good things tend to be. That only boiled a few seconds ago. This will still be fine. Right, let's get some water over that couscous. Just not overdo the water. Right, fine. And then we will leave that for 5 minutes to begin with, and then if need be, I'll leave it for longer. I'll report back. Okay, that's pretty much done. It took a little bit more than 5 minutes. I think it was 6.5, 7 minutes until I was happy with the consistency. The giant couscous is cooked, it's soft. So let's dole this out on here. Of course, if this was all ready for a meal, you would have mixed this in with all your additions at the same time, but we're just doing an example of how this might go together. Right, there is your giant couscous. I'm going to add in some nuts and some of that Italian seasoning. Anything larger than the seasoning or the little flakes you would want to obviously put in the boiling water so that they rehydrate, but this is all good to go. It just feels more substantial and less gloopy than the smaller size, normal size couscous. This is really good. And of course, if you wanted to up the protein content, same story as normal. You could add some freeze-dried, ground, diced, minced, freeze-dried or dehydrated red meat, like I guess like beef or pork or whatever you like. Or if you want something a little bit lighter, you can go for chicken, or you could even go for fish, I guess, freeze-dried fish. Who knows, whatever you fancy in there. And then choose some kind of Mediterranean spiced powder. So I've gone with a similar sort of thing that I had before. But of course, if you go to the shops, there are all manner of different packeted spice mixes, and you can choose something which you feel that goes with the sort of emotions that you want it to create in you as you're sat in your cold tent somewhere with your friends trying to stay alive. Right, I think this has been deeply informative, definitely better than anything else you've seen on YouTube today. So you can thank me in the comments. You can tell me how I'm absolutely wrong about everything on here, and you can tell me what other sorts of type of food, what sort of genre of expedition food, which of course has to be in the format of freeze-dried or dehydrated, which can be eaten in a very extreme location, in a tent setting, and without the ability to cook properly over a pan. That is the criteria that we're working against here. Taking on those super expensive freeze-dried meal companies who try and charge you 10, 15 quid for a slightly measly meal. Right, let me know in the comments. Bye. Microphone off, washing up done, terrible lighting, even now worse than it was before, but I found the wine.